Now, before I actually talk about the book at all, I want to tell you how I found out about the Island of Dr. Moreau, as far as the fact that there was such a story as the Island of Dr. Moreau. This must have happened when I was a small child, when TV was still a thing that people would watch. I must have seen an ad for the film The Island of Dr. Moreau that starred Marlon Brando and Val Kilmer. Of course, back then I probably didn't know that it was Marlon Brando and Val Kilmer who starred in it, but I did know that it was a movie that, at least in the trailer, had some impact on me. And of course, back then I had no idea that there was a book about this topic, or that it had been based on a book, or that in fact many movies were based on books. Um, and it is true that for a long time I have had that memory of this movie existing out there in the world. Later on, I became aware that it was based on a book, and in particular on the book The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells. H.G. Wells is also the author of a few other books, such as The Time Machine, which after he wrote it, he no longer had to work anymore. Um, the Invisible Man, of course, The Island of Dr. Moreau itself, and I forget one other that for whatever reason is escaping my attention. Ah, yes, The War of the Worlds. Um, as I found out later, each of these films, each of these books have been turned into films, in fact, in many cases, several times over. For my own part, prior to finally um, watching The Island of Dr. Moreau with Marlon Brando and with Val Kilmer, as well as the two other film adaptations that have been made of The Island of Dr. Moreau, one in the 1970s and one in 1933, um, all three of which I intend to watch soon. I decided that I wanted to read the book because, um, oftentimes when you read a book, you get a different perspective than when you watch the film. And for example, recently, one of my friends had watched the Hulu series The Handmaid's Tale and had told me to watch it. And in that case, I knew that it was a book first, because when I was little and I would go to what was then the B. Daltons, um, and what later became a Books a Million, after becoming a Borders, I think, um, I had seen this book with this girl in a red outfit um, near a brick wall, and I saw that book on the shelves in that bookstore when I was very young. And eventually, when my friend, um, who will remain nameless, suggested to me that I watch the Hulu series, I was like, yes, I will watch the Hulu series, but I will read the book first. And I will talk about that at a later time. In any case, right now, I want to share some ideas that I've gotten from reading The Island of Dr. Moreau. Um, and again, I want to share that now that I've read the book, I am looking forward to actually watching those movies as well. Um, to look at them as creations in their own right, and also, you know, just for enrichment. But anyway, now to the subject matter at hand, the book itself. Now, right now, there are going to be some spoilers. So if you want to read the book first, I encourage you to do so. I encourage you to do so. Forgive me that I mispronounced that right now a moment ago. So the basic idea of the Island of Dr. Moreau is that a guy named sorry, Pendrick, forgive me, a guy named Pendrick ends up on an island um, in the middle of the South Pacific. And he ends up there quite by accident. Um, and in fact, the manner in which he gets there is that he kind of gets rescued and he gets taken there. But anyway, when he gets on the island, he realizes that the island has two people on it. Um, One of them is named Montgomery, and one of them is named Dr. Moreau. I know you couldn't have thought of that either. I couldn't have thought of it either. But yes, it was Dr. Moreau and Montgomery. That was a joke, by the way. Okay. In any case, at that moment, he's laying in a room that they have set, not necessarily for him, but that apparently has been used before to, let's say, harbor guests. And Pendrick can hear um, the screams of an animal that is in very close proximity to this chamber where he is, where his bed is, and where he will be fed over the coming few days of this story, where he will basically live during the course of the story. Um, he later becomes aware through escaping onto the island grounds. He wants to examine them for greater curiosity. And he realizes that there are these creatures on the island. They're not like creatures he's ever seen before. And they're not like any creatures that he knows of. And of course, in the course of telling the story, H.G. Wells tells us that this character Pendrick studied biology to some extent when he was back in London. In fact, there are suggestions made that he studied botany. Um, this comes out in a conversation that he has with Dr. Moreau. Um, but in any case, we're to learn, in other words, that this guy should be aware of the nature of life on the planet, at least to a pretty broad extent. Um, and he has never seen these creatures before. And as he looks at them, in fact, there's this one scene where he's looking out toward the river, and he sees them drinking these animals, and he's never seen anything like them before. And he knows that there's something strange there. And in fact, if you read the beginning of the story, at least when we're on the island, and even before the island to a certain extent, there is a huge uh, kind of foreshadowing, and the darkness of the language is such that it makes you wonder what's going to happen. It feels dark. Um, and anyway, he later discovers that these are Dr. Moreau's creations, let's say. Dr. Moreau, for his own part, has been trying over the past 10 years, um, or approximately 12 years or so, 10 or 12 years, I forgot the exact amount, on this island to pursue what are called vivisecting experiments. Um, Vivisection, by the way, unfortunately, means surgery on living animals. That's the technical definition. Um, just a brief side note here. Um, there have been times in the past when vivisection was done to get kidney tissue to make vaccines. Um, and it's something that I find deeply troubling as a human being that we've done things to other animals. Uh, but anyway, so Dr. Moreau is a so called vivisector, and he has created these animals. And he later talks to Pendrick about these creations. He tries to make Pendrick know that uh, that that he's not a bad person. He's just trying to achieve an objective of achieving a human creature, a rational creature, um, from these non-human starting points, let's say. Now, of course, it is 100% true that the science, um, that the manner in which Dr. Moreau is trying to pursue these researches would not lead to any creature like the ones that are described in the book. But of course, this is the book. And anyway, what ends up happening is that Pendrick, while being held on this island, after he goes on that little run of the island to see what was happening, um, he comes back to his chambers. Um, Montgomery and Moreau had been looking for him, concerned about where he was, concerned about how much he's seen, um, and concerned about how he would react to what he has seen there. Um, there's an inherent sense that they're concerned that if word got out, that they would be shut down, so to speak. Um, and so, anyway, um, he later finds out other things about these creatures. He finds out that there's a group of them on the island, and that they can talk. He finds out that they have this person who is called the Sayer of the Law, and that this person recites a law. And we'll talk about that later. But it's basically a kind of code of conduct for these animals. Um, we also find out later that Dr. Moreau has been trying all this time to build up um, on his vivisection, to build up on it in such a way as to finally arrive at a human-like creature, a human creature, one that will not go back to being an animal. That's his stated goal. And anyway, his latest creation is a creature that started out as a puma, um, not to be confused with the shoe company Puma, but it's a cat. And I know all of you who are watching this, um, however many there are of you, know what a puma is. Um, and we later discover, um, or we are later thrown into a situation where the puma escapes, and Dr. Moreau is frantic in trying to find it, eventually getting himself killed um, in the process of trying to find it. Montgomery, who had been with him from the beginning on this island, approximately 10 or 12 years earlier to now, is fraught. And without Dr. Moreau, he essentially has a party, and essentially uh, the thrust is that he basically is committing suicide. Um, and so Pendrick is now alone on this island with the animals. And it takes a few months, but then he finally escapes the island. Um, and he goes through this phase where when he's back among people in San Francisco, and when he's back among people in England, he can't let go of what he saw on that island, and he um, let's say develops a kind of post-traumatic stress syndrome. um, and the way that this story unfolds before us is that these are the memoirs of this guy Edward Pendrick. That is the mechanism by which Wells tells the story. I have left out a lot of the detail of the story. Um, I wanted to give an idea of what the story was about without, of course, stealing from you the advantage of actually getting a chance to read it. I cannot recommend it enough to any of you out there who might even have the slightest bit of curiosity. Um, don't hesitate to get this book and read it. Um, it's a great work. Now I'm gonna kind of switch over to some kind of like little commentary. Okay. So the first thing that I want to let you know is that one of the things I liked about the book is that Wells does not pollute the story with a million characters that we don't get to know deeply. There are some authors who do that, and they do a great job of doing it. But I think one of the virtues of Wells's depiction of the island of Dr. Moreau is his real inspection of the three main characters, Pendrick, Dr. Moreau, and Montgomery. I think it is fair to say that we get enough development of each of these characters that we can really see um, who they are as people, let's say. Um, and as a brief side note, as I've seen the trailers for some of the movies that I want to watch, for example, the ones I mentioned earlier with Val Kilmer and Marlon Brando, the 1997 Island of Dr. Moreau, as well as the others, I've just seen the trailers. But already looking at the trailers, I can see that they deviate from the book in the context, in the sense that there's more characters and there's like kind of scenarios that show me that they've kind of deviated from the book. So I don't know if we'll be able to get the same psychological sense from these films. Um, but for me, reading the book, it was nice because I got to see the psychology of these characters. Um, that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is this. So one of the things I want to talk about in the context of the Island of Dr. Moreau on a separate note is the way that the Island of Dr. Moreau focuses on Dr. Moreau's singular focus on trying to make and improve these creatures. For example, one aspect of Dr. Moreau's investigations that Pendrick cannot stomach is his confession that he suspects that there is no aim for Dr. Moreau's research. In other words, whereas a great deal of scientific research has been done that has caused some harm along the way, or that could potentially cause harm on the way, there is often a great benefit to that research that somehow brings some justification for that harm. There have been some drugs that have been tested on animals prior to human use, prior to human tests, actually, with the understanding that should the drug cause traumatic harm or has a physiological effect that was not predicted prior to administration, the animals would then prevent the premature administration to humans. But in the case of Moreau's investigations, Pendrick admits that he cannot identify a single motivation besides the curiosity that Moreau has to try to achieve increasingly human animals. In fact, in my edition, on page 121, we see Pendrick's thoughts on the matter. Quote, had Moreau had any intelligible object, I could have sympathized at least a little with him. I am not so squeamish about pain as that. I could have forgiven him a little even had his motive been hate. But he was so irresponsible, so utterly careless. His curiosity, his mad, aimless investigations drove him on. And the things were thrown out to live a year or so, to struggle and blunder and suffer, at last to die painfully. They were wretched in themselves. The old animal hate moved them to trouble one another. The law held them back from a brief, hot struggle and a decisive end to their natural animosities. In this scene, we see um, Pendrick analyzing the difference between him and I think a lot of us. We wouldn't want to see an animal suffer. I think a lot of us wouldn't want to see anyone suffer. Anyone, human or animal. And we accept, I think, well, I'll speak for my own part here. Um, you know, there have been some experiments that have been done in the past, which have caused, or which could potentially have some harm, but that we have benefited from as human beings. And I'm being very loose here in saying that because what I'm talking about, I want to just outline this a little bit more clearly, is the fact that it is basically what happens today in terms of ethical guidelines. Whenever you do an experiment nowadays, you have to fill out an informed consent. You have to have informed consent from the subjects, and so on and so forth. I am not talking about the monstrous and barbaric things that have been done in the past, um, you know, like that. I'm talking about. Well, anyway, we'll leave that for later. But anyway, hello, this is David from the future. I just wanted to cut into this clip very quickly because I just wanted to state very, very clearly what kind of research I support and what kind of research I don't support. I want to be clear that for my own part, I think all experiments should be done with the informed consent of the experimental units, of the subjects, and subject to very clear ethical guidelines. I think that anything that is not done in that manner is wrong, and there can be no justification for it. If something is going to be good, then they should be able to get not only informed consent, not only should it be ethical, but they should be able to have at least, well, not at least, they should be able to have like the light of the public observing and saying this is good research. Um, and specifically, I do not support what Dr. Moreau was doing what the fictional Dr. Moreau was doing on the island. I just wanted to state that to make the distinction. The key fact is that Pendrick sees that there is no reason for these experiments to be occurring. In the same way that I, for example, don't think that Dr. Moreau should be pursuing this research. But it's the fascination, but for Dr. Moreau, it's the fascination. And can I get this to happen that drives him forward? And to me, like, Dr. Moreau is the kind of character that should stay in a novel, in my opinion. Another issue of the Island of Dr. Moreau that comes out in the discussion is this idea of the sayer of the law and what he talks about. The sayer of the law is a creature that was created by Dr. Moreau and that kind of, let's say, serves as a kind of leader of the so-called beast folk, the beast people who live on the island, the creations of Dr. Moreau. And basically, if you hear what he says, the sayer of the law, you will see that there is an aspect to it that's kind of like a religion. Okay. Another aspect of the island of Dr. Moreau is that its isolation makes it a world in and of itself. To put it differently, we can see that the island of Dr. Moreau as a metaphor for the world itself. Dr. Moreau takes the place of God as he creates the beast people, he gives them a law, tries to control their behavior. Even the sayer of the law can be said to kind of be a high priest of this religion of the beast peoples. Now, I have to correct the statement there. In the book, it does not say that Moreau gave them this law. Moreau mentions in passing to Pendrick that they have a law. They, the beast people, have a law. So he doesn't claim that he gave it to them. But my own suspicion, and I might be wrong about this, but my own suspicion is that it is a law that was given to them by Dr. Moreau. So I should state there that that's a speculation. Anyway, the law consists of roughly 5 stated statements, quote, not to go on all fours, end quote, not to suck up drink, end quote, quote, not to eat flesh nor fish, end quote, quote, not to claw the bark of trees, end quote, and quote, not to chase other men, end quote. Each admonition is then followed by, quote, "This is the law. Are we not men?" End quote. This is in my edition on pages 72 and 73. This is followed by the following statements. Quote, "His is the house of pain," end quote. Quote, "His is the hand that makes," end quote. Quote, "His is the hand that wounds," end quote. Quote, "His is the, let me see here, the hand that heals," end quote. And whereas many world religions have rules that are meant to, for example, permit the proper functioning of society, there is a clear distinction in the law of the island of Dr. Moreau. Um, so the so yeah, so I claim that the purpose of the law of Dr. Moreau, the religion of the island, if you will, is predicated on preserving the humanness of the beast people. Not only is this reinforced by the statement, quote, "Are we not men?" which is appended to each of the statements of the law, but the idea that Dr. Moreau would be interested in prolonging the state of humanness of the animals is captured when he states, quote, "This is Dr. Moreau speaking to Pendrick. Each time I dip a living creature into the bath of burning pain, I say, this time I will burn out the animal. Burn out all the animal. This time I will make a rational creature of my own," end quote. Earlier, referring to his desire to preserve their humanity, he states, quote, "But I will conquer yet." He says that in reference to stating to Pendrick, basically, that that they always seem to revert. He creates them, they seem awfully human to him, and then they start to revert back to being animals. And so, in reference to that, he says, "But I will conquer yet," that he's not going to give up, that he's going to keep on this struggle that he has, this pure, um, to his mind, a scientific struggle, but of course, what we characterize as the actions of a mad scientist. There is even a parallel to the Bible. When Adam, a creature made in the image of the God of the Bible, has sinned, God comes and questions him in the Garden of Eden. When Dr. Moreau discovers that the prohibition of the eating of flesh has been broken, he goes out into the island with a special auditory device, a kind of sound cone. And at a particular location in the island, Dr. Moreau makes a noise which is clearly a signal, or it is only a moment when nearly all the animals present themselves to Dr. Moreau. Dr. Moreau then states, asking them what has happened, and asks the animals to confess whichever soul among them has committed the crime of eating flesh. Now, on the other hand, that's all well and good. And of course, here we can see that H.G. Wells might be making like a kind of social commentary. This comparison between a kind of religious law among the beast people with Dr. Moreau as their creator, as their god, um, you know, as their judge, and so on. But on the other hand, as mentioned before, I suggested that a lot of the religious rules, let's say, from time immemorial, have been based on how to get a society to function. Um, right, but here there might be to my mind, I claim that there's an ulterior motive here. So as mentioned earlier, it is possible that there are ulterior motives to the law, which to my mind are both highly rational, considering Dr. Moreau's overarching motivations to preserve the life of the beast people for as long as possible, to be able to continue to draw observations regarding each of his experimental units until their death. Only through ensuring that he is able to monitor the experiments for the duration of their life can he determine whether any of his beast people should ever maintain its humanness for the remaining duration of their life. In other words, if he is to figure out if he has achieved his objective of creating a human animal that stays human, he has to be able to follow it through its life. So if an animal dies in an unnatural manner, let's say, then his ability to continue the experiment um, ceases. And of course, this is only the way that a mad scientist would think, of course. And it does not state that he monitors them after the fact. He says when he's talking to Pendrick that, you know, when they start like, deviating back to their beast nature, then obviously like I just set them on their own. I don't want to see them because they give me great like shame because they show me that I have failed. But that's what he tells Pendrick. And of course, there's so much more that he doesn't. There's so much more of each of these people that we don't know. Um, and so I suspect that this is like one of the reasons the law says not to eat beast or fish. And of course, in there, if I'm right that he wrote the law and gave it to them, then he might also be experimenting with fish. So now I want to talk about another issue here. Um, so now I want to talk about another issue here. H.G. Wells talks about a condition that Pendrick has when he leaves the island. It's a condition that we today would know as post-traumatic stress syndrome. Now, obviously, I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, so I cannot definitively tell you for sure that Pendrick has um, um, post-traumatic stress syndrome, but I'm pretty sure that it is that is what it is. And he gives us and Wells, in other words, gives us a very vivid depiction of post-traumatic stress syndrome. Uh, he describes how Pendrick has difficulty releasing himself from the experience he had when he was on the island, referring to people he sees around him. Pendrick states, um, quote, "I feel as though the animal was surging up through them, that presently the degradation of the islanders will be played over again on a larger scale," end quote. In my edition of the book, it's on page 170. And he also describes various other incidents, like, for example, how the sermons of the preacher reminds him of the, quote, big things that the sayer of the law would say to the beast people on the island. In other words, on the island, when he was surrounded by the beast people, there was, again, as we mentioned earlier, the sayer of the law. And the sayer of the law would state these admonitions, laying out the ground rules of the law. And he would give them sermons, which Pendrick referred to as big things um, on the island. And he sees the preacher giving a sermon as the same kind of thing. Um, and when he's walking in a multitude back in England, um, he can hear the mewing of the cat people that were on the island, because some of the animals on the island were cats or were started from cats, such as the puma that was being investigated by Moreau and which ultimately led to Moreau's death. At the same time, I think that this PTSD that Pendrick experiences is a way of comparing these human-like creatures created by Dr. Moreau on the island with humans formed by nature, which I think is a kind of like uh, an introduction of a social commentary by Wells. You know, um, I don't want to go into too much detail on this aspect, but these human-like creatures that Moreau is creating and humans as created by nature, you know, they can be compared in a lot of ways. And for example, here when Pendrick talks about the animals surging up through the people he sees around him, who are actual real people, you know, how far is that from reality? You know, um, it's an interesting question. Um, Finally, I want to point out a parallel to another work of literature. Um, One of my favorite short stories is Richard Connell's quote, the most dangerous game, end quote. It is a short story that follows the protagonist, Rainsford, on his seemingly unlucky shipwreck and subsequent survival by landing on an island ominously called Ship Trap Island. We discover that this island is actually the residence of General Zaroff and his assistant Ivan. By the way, there's spoilers here, so if you want to read that story first, go and read it and then come back to the video. But anyway, this is the island. This is the island residence of General Zaroff and his assistant Ivan. Later, we find out General Zaroff is a hunter, and he actually knows who Rainsford is, because Rainsford is also a hunter. And Zaroff has done something which he finds fascinating. He states to Rainsford that he has found the most dangerous game and that he stocks his island with this game. We later find out that they're humans. Like Dr. Moreau, Zaroff has become enamored of an activity, has isolated himself to an island where he can be the sole decision maker. He takes on a loyal assistant to cooperate in these actions, and Zaroff and his assistant both die on the island, leaving the protagonist to survive. One can even argue that there was a hunting scene in the Island of Dr. Moreau. And there are these parallels between these two stories, and even the main character, or not the main character, but the kind of, I guess kind of the main character, even though they're not the heroes, but Zaroff and Moreau are both singularly focused on their own objectives. They see no issue at all with ethics, morality, or legality of their activities, and they have established a means by which to fulfill their objectives without interruptions or scrutiny. And so it's interesting the way that in both of these scenarios, in both of these stories, an island has been used as a place where, kind of, let's say, bad things can happen. In any case, I want to close up this video by saying that for any of you that are watching, I encourage you to read The Island of Dr. Moreau. It's a great book, and let me know if you like the video. Thank you so much and have a great day.